For the last 100 years or so, we've all been told this one single story about addiction. It's a story about bad choices and dangerous chemicals. But what if that entire story is wrong? Today, we're going to explore a completely different way of looking at one of the biggest issues of our time.
Yeah, I know. That's a pretty bold claim, right? But the evidence we're going to look at is incredibly powerful. And it suggests that maybe we need to rethink not just our drug policies, but how we think about the very nature of human connection. So let's start with a story that we've all grown up with.
For a whole century, pretty much everything we thought we knew was built on this one really straightforward idea, the theory of chemical hooks. It's simple, it's easy to understand, and it puts all of the blame right on the drugs themselves. The idea is pretty simple, right? You try a powerful drug. That drug has these chemical hooks that hijack your brain. You use it for a little while, your body gets hooked, and just like that, you're an addict. It seems to make perfect sense on the surface. But here's the thing. When you actually look at the real world, this whole story starts to get some serious holes in it. Okay, so let's dig into a couple of things that they don't add up. And these aren't just tiny little exceptions either. We're talking about huge, real-world examples that really make you question everything you've been told.
Okay, think about this for a second. Your grandmother goes into the hospital for a hip replacement. For weeks, she might be given a drug called diamorphine for the pain. Diamorphine? What is that? It's basically medical-grade heroin. We're talking stuff that's way pure, often stronger than anything you'd find on the street. So, according to the chemical hook story, all these patients should be walking out of the hospital as addicts. But they don't. It almost never happens. So, what gives? What's really going on?
Well, this question leads us to this really fascinating experiment by a professor named Bruce Alexander. So in the old experiments, you'd put a single rat in an empty cage, all alone. You give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water with heroin or cocaine in it. In that lonely cage, the rat almost always becomes obsessed with the drugged water and eventually overdoses. But Professor Alexander thought, what if the cage is the problem? So he built what he called Rat Park. And this place was basically heaven for rats. They had friends, toys, lots of space to run around, good food, the whole shebang. And in Rat Park, the rats almost never touched the drugged water. None of them became compulsive users. None of them overdosed. And it turns out this isn't just about rats. See, during the Vietnam War, something like 20% of American soldiers were using heroin. A lot of it. Back home, there was this huge panic, thinking hundreds of thousands of addicts were about to flood the country. But then, this incredible study found that when those soldiers came home, 95% of them, they just stopped. Cold turkey. No rehab, no agonizing withdrawal. They left a horrible cage, a war zone, and came back to their park, and the addiction just faded away.
And that right there, that just perfectly sets up this whole new way of thinking. What if addiction isn't about the chemical? What if it's an adaptation to your environment? What if it's not the substance but the cage, the isolation, the trauma, the despair? That's the real driver. This opens the door to a much deeper, more human way of looking at this.
Which brings us to the work of Dr. Gabor Maté. He argues that to really understand addiction, we've been asking the wrong question entirely. Instead of focusing on the why the addiction, he says we need to look at the pain that's hiding underneath it all.
So with this much broader definition, you can see that addiction isn't just about, illegal drugs. It can be literally anything. Gambling, shopping, working 24/7, even our phones. It's any behavior that gives us a little bit of relief from pain in the short term, even though it causes us real harm in the long term. And that all leads to his most crucial point. So the real question becomes, where does that pain come from? Dr. Maté argues that addiction is almost always a response to some kind of deep, unbearable suffering. The addiction itself, that's not the main problem. It's actually a person's attempt to solve a problem, the problem of being in overwhelming pain.
And that pain, he found, almost always comes from one place: childhood trauma. And look, trauma isn't just some bad memory. It physically changes how a child's brain develops. These key circuits in the brain, the ones for motivation, for feeling connected, for natural pain relief, they don't develop properly. So the drug, the addiction, it becomes a substitute for what the brain was supposed to get naturally. One of his patients told him the first time she used heroin, it felt like a warm, soft hug, something she'd never had.
Okay, so if we accept that addiction is really a response to trauma and feeling disconnected, then how are we supposed to deal with it as a society? Well, we can look at 2 totally opposite approaches, one based on that old story of punishment and a new one based on connection.
Well, for the last 100 years, we've gone with the punishment model.
The idea is that if we make addicts suffer more, it'll give them an incentive to quit. So we shame them. We throw them in jail. We give them a criminal record so they can't get a job. Basically, we take people who are already traumatized and in pain, and we decide to traumatize them even more.
I mean, this quote from Dr. Maté just hits the nail on the head. We've built a system that actively makes the problem worse by increasing the very pain and isolation that causes addiction in the first place. It's like we're trying to put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it. But there's a place that actually tried the complete opposite.
Let's go back to the year 2000. Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in all of Europe. 1% of their population was addicted to heroin. So they did something that seemed crazy at the time. They decriminalized all drugs, everything from weed to crack. And here's the really key part. They took all the money they used to spend on arresting and jailing addicts, and they spent it on helping them reconnect with society. They helped them find jobs, offered small loans to start businesses, provided therapy. The goal was to give every addict a reason to get out of bed in the morning.
So, what happened? Well, after 15 years, the results were, honestly, they were stunning. Injecting drug use dropped by 50%. Overdose deaths, HIV infections, all of the big indicators of a drug crisis, they just plummeted. It was a massive success, and it proved that a system built on compassion and connection actually works.
So look, this whole story isn't just about people with really severe drug addictions. This new way of thinking has huge implications for all of us, for our whole culture, because the same forces are at play in all of our lives.
See, at our most basic level, human beings are bonding animals. We are hardwired to connect. When we're healthy and happy, we connect with each other. But when we can't, because we're lonely or anxious or traumatized, we will bond with something that gives us a sense of relief. The addiction, whatever it is just a symptom of a life where real human connection is missing.
And this is where it gets a little uncomfortable for all of us. As a society, we've been making a trade. Over the last few decades, the size of our homes has gotten bigger and bigger, but the number of close friends we feel we can call on in a crisis has been getting smaller and smaller. We've kind of accidentally built a society that for a lot of people looks a whole lot more like that lonely, empty rat cage than it does a fun, connected rat park.
And that really brings us to the single most important takeaway from all of this. The solution isn't just to force people to be sober. The real solution is to help people, all people, build the connections that make life meaningful and beautiful. It's a message that replaces judgment with love, shame with compassion, and isolation with, you guessed it, human connection.